Hey everyone, this is Mike, and today we're going to talk about job changes that I would like to see in our next expansion, Endwalker. It's a topic that has been requested a few times, both in comments as well as on the streams. So today I'm just going to be talking about it. If you have ever got anything that you would like me to cover on the channel, leave it in the comments and maybe I will make a video of it. So because I'm relatively bad at coming up with new abilities, because that's something that people had been asking as well, like what new abilities do you want to see be introduced to some of the jobs, but I'm very bad at those kind of things. So I'm just going to be talking about things that I would like to see changed that are already in the game. There will be a couple of changes that I want to make that technically introduce new stuff, so I guess it kind of covers both of these things, but it's mainly going to be about abilities that are already there that I would like to see get some change to them, both in usability or maybe actually like a new effect or something like that. So let's start off with our tanks. Gunbreaker, because Gunbreaker, of course, as most of you probably know, my favorite job in the game, so there's not really all that much that I think really needs changing over here. Main thing that I would personally like to see changed is Bloodfest. I do know that the way Bloodfest works is kind of for a lore reason, because you're kind of like extracting the bullets from the opponent that you are fighting, but from a usability standpoint, it would be a lot easier or a lot more useful if you would be able to use Bloodfest whenever you're in combat, kind of like how Infuriate works for Warrior, because it often happens that you're going into a fight, your Bloodfest comes up, but the boss phases away for like a cool animation and ad phase, maybe something else, and then you can't use your Bloodfest for however long that animation lasts, and you need to wait for the boss to come back, and that might sometimes misalign it with the rest of your burst window. That kind of things can be a little bit annoying. So it would be really nice if we could just use Bloodfest whenever we are in combat without actually needing a target to get our bullets, so to speak. Moving over to Warrior, Storm's Eye. This is mainly going to be for dungeons, because it still feels kind of annoying having to do 3 single target GCDs whenever you're trying to AoE just to get that damage buff going. Put it onto Mithril Tempest. I think just giving Mithril Tempest the ability to grant you Storm's Eye is not going to break Warrior in any way. I know, for example, in certain fights as well, with short boss phases, for example, I believe Shiva was one of those as well, it would be useful if you could get Storm's Eye earlier, like without having to do your Storm's Eye combo, like just you throwing a Tomahawk, or for example using In Release and having In Release grant Storm's Eye as well, but those are very niche use cases anyways. When it comes down to dungeons itself, I think that's where my main complaint lies with the Storm's Eye buff. Yes, it's a lot better now with lasting a minute, being much easier to get back as well by using Mithril Tempest, but still, I think it would be really nice if Mithril Tempest would just apply it in the first place. That way, when you start out a dungeon run, you can immediately get that damage buff going. On the other hand, Holmgang usability. This is actually something that I never really had an issue with until I started running Delibrum Regine Savage, because I got killed twice because of Holmgang memes. And it is because the way Holmgang works is when you have a target, you need to be in range of that target to use Holmgang, because you kind of like chain yourself and the enemy together. But when you don't have a target, you can just use Holmgang on yourself. So whenever I was doing the Delibrum Regine Savage, I would need to press F1 to target myself, and then I could use Holmgang, because then I did not have a target. But sometimes when I was kiting, for example, the slimes at the beginning or the Minotaurs during the Minotaur encounter, when I have a target and that target is too far away from me, I can't actually use Holmgang whilst I still have that target. I know it's only a small thing to press F1, target yourself and then use it, but still it would sometimes mess up and then get myself killed, as you could see from my first clear of the Delibrum Savage. So it's a very small thing, but basically make it so that if your target is out of range, just use Holmgang as if it were to be used on yourself. Just a small quality of life change. Moving over to Paladin. Again, this is a job that I don't think needs all that much. There are just 2 things that are mainly just quality of life things. First of all, Divine Veil. Make it apply to the Paladin himself. I don't know why it doesn't. And secondly, make it so that whenever your Divine Veil expires, that it still triggers the effect. Like right now, you use Divine Veil, you're waiting for a healer to physically heal you, or like for example, I believe the Fairy of Scholar can trigger this effect as well, but you basically need to get healed for it to activate, and that can sometimes be a little bit annoying, especially when you're trying to optimize a fight a whole lot more as well, because during optimization you're trying to cut down on the healing as much as possible. So Divine Veil can be a little bit annoying To proc in those circumstances, looking towards Party Finder as well, like you're usually going to be the off tank as the Paladin, and healers just might not notice that you have Divine Fee already, or might not want to use a heal on you because it's not necessary to survive an AoE or something like that. I think just treating it like an XCOG or the horoscope from Astrologian would be kind of cool, because it also introduces the effect of learning the timing for when you want to pop it, so that 30 seconds later, I believe it is, it will automatically proc and grant you that shield. Could be really cool. Secondly, we have cover. Cover used to be really strong back in Stormblood, maybe a little bit too strong, so I can see why they gave it a gauge cost. Like right now it costs 50 oath gauge to use, but right now it also doesn't have a damage reduction aspect to it anymore. So they made it from just a normal cooldown that also had 20% damage reduction on it to costing 50 oath gauge and not having damage reduction anymore. So the way that I'll probably change it is still keep it costing that 50 oath gauge, but give it some damage reduction back. It doesn't need to be 20%, maybe 10 or 15 would be enough, but I would like kind of give it something at least, because right now cover feels very useless, and more often than not you're just going to be tank swapping if you want the Paladin to take a tank buster instead, and then swap back later is much more effective use of your oath gauge. And then last but not least, Dark Knight. This is the one that I would like to see changed the most, purely because of the fact that I feel like in this expansion they kind of made Dark Knight the worst warrior, so to speak, when it comes down to like their rotation and stuff, because Delirium is just the worst in the release, and then a lot of their other stuff kind of feels like warrior now as well. When it comes down to Bloodspiller, Quietus, that kind of stuff, I don't mind that being similar to warrior, because then I should criticize that on Gunbreaker as well, because Burst Strike and the AoE version are basically Fell Cleave and Decimate from warrior. But Delirium is too much of a copy. It's literally you press it and you do your 5 Bloodspillers, instead of warrior pressing in the release and doing 5 Fell Cleave. So that's what I want to see changed. The way how I would change it is make it back into a GCD. Back in the day in Heavensward, Delirium was a combo finisher. It was a 1-2-3 combo. You would choose between either Soul Eater or Delirium, depending on if you could use Dark Arts on your Bloodspiller, or also if you would need that int down on the boss. Now of course int down, those kind of things don't exist anymore, so maybe make it into some kind of a damage over time ability back into Dark Knight, to where you would be changing up between using that Soul Eater or using Delirium, depending on if you need to reapply your dot or something like that. Could be really cool. I don't necessarily think Dark Knight needs a damage over time ability, but it's mainly because I just don't want Delirium to be the worst in the release like it is right now. The other thing I would change is to make Blood Weapon kind of work like Bunshin does for Ninja right now, where it gets charges, because if they decide to keep Delirium the way it is right now, we basically have 2 abilities that we want to use in the second half of our off-global cooldown window. And of course 2 of them you can't use that in the same off-global cooldown window, so you would need to use them between different GCDs, which feels kind of annoying to use. And generally as well, Blood Weapon, it often happens that you don't get all of the usage out of it, because you lagged or because you had to disengage from the boss. And seeing how they've done it for Ninja, I don't think it's that far out of the question that they would do it for Dark Knight as well. So those would be my 2 changes: Blood Weapon, quality of life change, Delirium, just make it not be a worse version of Inner Release. Then moving over to our healers, let's start off with White Mage. Give them a little bit more movement ability, because right now White Mage is the most immobile job in the game. The Lily system did make it a whole lot better for them, but it is still kind of annoying to move about as a White Mage from time to time. So maybe give them something else, like kind of a Ruin 2 that does less damage for them but allows them to weave an ability here or there, or to cover some more movement. When it comes down to the Lily system itself, maybe put some kind of a damage action in there, kind of like Scholar has Energy Drain for their Aether Flow. Give something like that for White Mage as well, because very often when I'm running a dungeon with some of my friends who know how to tank and know how to do big DPS as well when it comes down to AoEing down enemies, I'm just sitting on my lilies. I'm not doing anything with them, so between the pulls I'll just spam my lily actions to get towards that blood lily, because I just don't need them. So it would be really nice if there was some kind of a maybe like the same potency as Glare, or a slightly higher potency as Glare or something like that, that we could spend our lilies on, and then of course still work towards the blood lily. Last but not least, the timer for Presence of Mind at the moment is at a very awkward 2.5 minutes. So during the opener it will line up with the rest of your raid buffs, but outside of that it doesn't really align with anything, because at 2.5 minutes you don't have anything. At 5 minutes, yeah, you maybe have a trick attack if you have a ninja, But outside of that, like, it's not really gonna align with anything. So 2.5 minutes is just a very weird timer for a DPS increasing action. Or of course, if you want to use it for healing, that's perfectly fine as well. But it's just an awkward timer. Maybe make it 2 minutes or something like that. If they were to find that too strong or something, maybe reduce the duration of presence of mind. I wouldn't mind that too much, but just like make it not be 2.5 minutes, because that's just a really weird timer. Then Scholar, not too much to change here either. My main complaint is pet AI, because you can ghost actions here or there, can be really annoying. That complaint is gonna come back with Summoner as well later down the line. But outside of just like quality of life changes to the pet AI itself, Fey Blessing is the only thing that I find a little bit annoying on Scholar at the moment. The heal itself is not that very strong. Of course, you're also not spending a lot of Fairy Gauge in order to use it. But it feels very weak, and it's on a 1 minute cooldown. Like, your Indom is stronger than this, and it's only on a 30-second cooldown, and it's technically using the same weight of actions, because using your Fey Blessing costs 10 gauge, using an Indom grants you 10 gauge. So it's kind of similar on that regard. So either make it so that Fey Blessing is on a lower cooldown, so that this tiny heal is a bit more spammable, like just to top you off for an AoE or something like that, or keep it on the 1 minute, but increase the potency, or maybe make it so that there is a shielding aspect attached to it. I know that in Endwalker they're gonna try to separate pure healer and barrier healer a little bit more, so maybe make this another shield that you can give to your party with the same healing potency still attached to it, or something like that. Either or, and then of course if they make it stronger, maybe make it cost 20 gauge to make up for that. And then our last healer, Astrologian, again nothing too much that I would change here since the changes in, what was it, patch 5.3 I believe. I've been quite happy with the way Astrologian plays. The only thing that I find a bit weird about Astrologian is Synastry. It doesn't really work all that well. Like, you throw it on the other tank and you need to physically GCD single target heal that other tank to really make use of Synastry, and you don't really use that many GCDs because Astrologian has so many off-global cooldown heals to use instead. So maybe make it so that it's just all single target healing that counts, so that you can still use your Essential Dignity, Celestial Intersection, and maybe of course if you use a Benefic or here or there if it is needed. And of course if your co-healer is healing that other tank with maybe an Excog or something like that, could work quite well with that as well. So just a little bit of quality of life around Synastry. Outside of that, I think Astrologian plays pretty well at the moment, but of course Astrologian is going to get a slight rework in Endwalkers to put it more towards that pure healer fantasy that they're trying to go for. Moving over to our melee DPS, let's start off with Ninja. Ever since the rework that they got in patch 5.1 I believe it was, where they changed how the Mudra system worked and such, it changed very dramatically from being a job that had a lot of things going on all the time to now having a 15-second burst window where they have a lot of going on, and then 45 seconds of downtime where barely anything is happening. Whilst I do think that the trick attack window that they have right now is incredibly fun, the 45 seconds of downtime between your trick attacks is very boring. So I'd like for them to introduce something to make this downtime a little bit more interesting. Maybe reintroduce something like Mutilate, which was a dot that we used to have back in Heavensward. Of course, it was just a one button press at that moment, but seeing how Shadowfang is now our one button press, maybe make Mutilate into some kind of a combo, or introduce Dancing Edge again as some kind of like a damage buff that you want to keep up that lasts for, let's say, about 20 seconds, so that you would be able to keep that up, still do your 15-second trick attack, and then reapply your Dancing Edge. Would be kind of cool just to have something else to keep track of during your downtime, because right now your downtime is kind of boring on Ninja. Moving over to Monk, not really much I would change here either. Again, the rework did make Monk a lot more enjoyable to me. Only thing I would really say is Anatman is not really interesting at the moment. It just lets you keep twin snakes, and that's pretty much it. Outside of that, keeping your stance isn't that important because form shift exists, so I don't really see what Anatman is trying to achieve at the moment. Turn that into something a little bit more interesting. What exactly they would do with it, I have no idea. But just something that is not just a way to keep your twin snakes between phases, because that is kind of boring. Moving over to Samurai, again, not that much to say. I'm a very big fan of Samurai at the moment. It is one of my favorite melees to play. If Ninja did not have all of the nostalgia attached to it, because it was my first job for many things, I think Samurai would probably be my favorite melee at the moment. Feels really good to play. The only thing that feels a little bit weird to me is Tsubame Gaishi, because of how the 1 minute cooldown interacts with the rest of your rotation. Of course, that can totally be from my inexperience of playing Samurai, because I mainly play tank, whenever I play DPS, it's usually Machinist, so I don't really get to play all of the other jobs all that much, which is why it might feel a bit weird to me. But overall, not that much that I would change. Maybe change the timer on Tsubame Gaishi or something. But again, like, if you're a better samurai player than me, let me know in the comments if it really lines up with the rest of your rotation that well, because I do believe that it does. I think it's just my inexperience on the job speaking here. And then our last melee, Dragoon, not much to change here again as well. Maybe some kind of an AoE Mirage dive for inside of a dungeon. But again, that's not really super important. The main thing that I would like to see changed here is Coercion Torment. This is your third combo string inside of your AoE combo to extend/apply Disembowel. Disembowel is your damage buff that you get by doing a 1-2 combo, but just like Warrior, this 1-2 combo is a single target combo, and even worse than Warrior, this Disembowel buff that you get does not get extended by doing your AoE combo. Your AoE combo only extends your Blood of the Dragon buff, so I would really like to see them either extend Disembowel with, for example, Coercion Torment, or even the other one, like I forgot the name of it, like the second skill in that combo chain, make that extend Disembowel, or both could work as well, or also make one of them apply the Disembowel buff, so that you don't need to use 2 single target GCDs inside of an AoE environment. Would definitely be a nice quality of life buff. Moving over to Bard, this is pretty much only quality of life stuff that I'm going to be talking about, as the rotation itself feels pretty good. Main issue that I have is make songs affect the Bard itself. Right now, Bard has these 3 different songs that they can sing, which only give very minor buffs, but still any little bit helps. But it doesn't affect themselves, so it's kind of annoying that you're supporting the party, but you're not really getting anything back in return. And then the biggest one here is going to be Battle Voice as well. This is supposed to be your big 3-minute raid buff, and it doesn't really help you out as a Bard itself. So just make those things affect you as a Bard. On the other hand, this is purely for dungeons, or well, mainly for dungeons. Have some AoE versions of your damage over time abilities. The majority of your kit as a Bard is about having those damage over time abilities on your targets, and when you're going into a dungeon, you need to single target all of these different mobs to apply your dot, and eventually there is going to be like diminishing returns that you get there. So it would be a lot more useful to just have an AoE version of your dot, so you can press those 2 buttons, have your dots applied to the whole mob pack, and then you can just start using that spread shot, or whatever it is called, to just start AoEing that way. That would pretty much be the only thing that I would change about Bard, as I do think that right now Bard plays pretty well. I know a lot of people miss the old crit reliance, but I think that the change that they've made to go away from the crit reliance is really good when it comes down to different party compositions, because otherwise you would always need that Scholar and Dragoon in your party to play Bard well, or to feel like you're playing Bard well, whereas right now you don't need those jobs anymore, so that's pretty good over there. Machinist, this is mainly like personal pet peeves, so to speak, because I used to be a very big Machinist fan back in Stormblood and Heavensward, but I must say that the current Machinist is still really fun to play. As I mentioned before, it is still probably my favorite DPS to play at the moment. So I definitely still enjoy Machinist. It's just that there are a few changes that they've made with the Shadowbringers rework that made it a little bit more boring. Like, for example, Hypercharge. Back in the day we had Rapid Fire, which would make us just press a lot of different buttons very quickly, and now we're just pressing 3 buttons a lot. So it's not a lot of buttons quickly, but quickly pressing the same buttons a lot, which is kind of boring in my opinion. Yes, it still does what you're kind of doing before, but it's just going to be spamming the same buttons, which is kind of unfortunate. In the same vein, Wildfire is very much so dumbed down as well. Back in the day, you would try to align all of your damaging actions, your buffs, like for example all of your off-global cooldowns, to fit inside of that Wildfire window to do as much damage as possible, whereas right now your Wildfire only cares about GCDs. Of course, with the way Machinist was reworked, it fits because you want to make sure that you have your Drill and your Air Anchor on cooldown before you go into your Hypercharge and such. So it all really fits with the way Machinist works right now. But I do feel like it is a little bit less satisfying than Machinist used to be before, because before it was really satisfying that you would fit everything inside of that Wildfire buff, whereas right now it's like, oh, Wildfire is coming up, do I have 50 heat gauge? Yes, okay, let's go. My Wildfire is going to be fine damage-wise. So maybe spice things up a little bit. How they would change that, I have no idea, because the way Machinist plays right now, it just fits together really well. It's just satisfying in a different way, I guess you could say. But as I mentioned before, those are just pet peeves. I also have no idea how they would change it with the way Machinist works right now. because everything just fits together really well right now as well. And then moving over to Dancer, again, not much to change. I've said it many times before, I think Dancer is really well designed at the moment. Only thing I would change is make dances scale with skill speed. At the moment, if you're playing Dancer, you pretty much want 0 skill speed on your gear. I do believe there is one skill speed tier out there that still aligns your dances with your GCD itself, but outside of that one skill speed tier or no skill speed at all, you don't align with your dances anymore. So it feels a little bit awkward to use. So making them scale with skill speed would make it so that they align with your GCD, meaning that it basically aligns much better with your rotation, of course. This does mean that you might use your technical step 1 GCD earlier over the course of a whole fight or something, but it wouldn't really make or break raid buff alignment, at least in my opinion. Unless you really go all in on skill speed, but I don't really think that you would want to do that anyway. So that would be the only change to Dancer. Then our final role, the casters. Let's start off with Red Mage. Embolden is the only raid buff in the game, I believe, at the moment that is a specific damage type. Ever since the Monk rework, that now affects all damage types. I think Embolden is the only one that works on physical now. So I would just like to see that change into all damage as well, so that Red Mage is now a little bit more attractive to take in a double caster team composition as well. I also really think that the diminishing returns that you get from Embolden, like it starts at 10%, then becomes weaker over the duration, feels a bit awkward as well, so just make it a 5% constant or something like that. Definitely wouldn't mind that. Then also when it comes down to your AoEs, I've seen a lot of people ask for an AoE combo finisher. I do think it would be kind of nice to have that as well, because we have it for a single target. Definitely could see them do something for our AoEs as well. The way how they would do it, maybe something like Samurai, where you use your enchanted Moulinet 3 times, and then after you have 3 stacks of Moulinet, you can use your combo finisher or something like that. Last but not least, something personal of mine that I really liked about Stormblood Red Mage is Impact. Right now, Impact is the long casting spell for our AoE rotation, where we use Thunder or Arrow, and then we use our dual cast proc on Impact. But back in Stormblood, Impact used to be part of our single target rotation, and it was really fun because whenever you use Jolt, you would get Impactful for, I believe it was 30 seconds or something, and Impact was basically a stronger version of Jolt. So you still wanted to try to use Impact as late as possible in the buff timer that you had, because of course you don't want to lose any fire or stone procs, but you would still want to use Impact before that buff disappeared, because it would still be a damage gain over Jolt, and also the animation for it is just beautiful. And I would just like to see that more on the boss, to be honest. So reintroduce Impact back in the single target rotation was definitely something that I would like to see, and then maybe give like Scatter 2 or something for the AoE rotation, because I don't really care about the AoE rotation that much. I like having my cooler single target rotation back. It added a tiny bit of extra depth into the rotation that I did quite enjoy. Moving over to Black Mage, nothing much to say here. Shadowbringer's Black Mage has been the most fun and the best that this job has ever been. The only thing that I see a lot of people throw around is like a reverse between the lines right now. When you throw your ley lines down, you have to move out, you can use between the lines to jump back into your ley lines. A lot of people have been saying to do the opposite, where you can have your ley lines teleport to the Black Mage. It would be kind of useful in certain scenarios. Might be a little bit too strong, because of course Black Mage is a high skill job in my opinion, where you need to plan everything around the fight. Like playing it on a dummy is really easy, playing it in a savage environment not so much. So I do think that it might diminish kind of like the skill ceiling over there, but on the other hand it would make learning the fights a whole lot easier. And on the other hand, if they put like a big cooldown on it, like let's say 30 seconds, so that you can only use it once per ley lines usage, I don't think it would necessarily break Black Mage, because if you compare it to all of the other jobs have a much easier time pulling off their damage than something like a Black Mage has. So I definitely wouldn't mind seeing that. And then our last job on the list, Summoner. This is where I kind of have a new ability in mind to change energy drain. But first of all, again, pet AI. There's a lot of ghosting going on with the pet actions. For example, Phoenix, like needing to spread her wings to give you that regen over time buff as well, kind of delaying the auto attacks and such. Just fix the pet AI. I think that is one of the most important things that they could do for Summoner as well as Scholar. And then if they ever want to introduce something new, like Beastmaster for example, it would be really important that the pet AI is much better than it is right now. As I already mentioned before, energy drain, I think the whole Aetherflow system isn't really that important to Summoner anymore. It used to be part of the rotation back in Stormblood and in Heavensward as well, where I believe it was linked together with your Dreadworm trans, but at the moment there isn't really any connection between your rotation anymore. Like for example, your trances reset your Tri-Disasters to keep your dots active. Your pet actions give you Ruin 4 stacks, that all works together, but energy drain is just kind of there. You press energy drain, you press your Festers, you're done, there's no real interaction with your rotation. Yeah, of course, you want to have dots active on the target when you use Fester, but that's pretty much it. I think it would be much cooler if instead of having energy drain, we would have a 30-second cooldown to summon something new, like have another summon come into the field for let's say 10 seconds, and during those 10 seconds, your 2 Aetherflow actions that you would have would become a single target or an AoE action that you could give to this new summon. I think that would be really cool. Also plays into the thing of being a summoner, you're summoning new things, would be really cool in that aspect. And then also, third thing, the inconsistency between your demi summons right now. But the way Bahamut works is you use Dreadworm Trance, you exit Dreadworm Trance, then you summon your Bahamut. But then when we look at Phoenix is whenever you go into Firebird Trance, you immediately summon your Phoenix as well, and then your GCDs turn into Phoenix GCDs, which I thought was really cool when you reach level 80 for that. But there's a really big disconnect between Bahamut and Phoenix, so I'd really like to see Dreadworm Trance become more similar to Firebird Trance, so that when you go into Dreadworm Trance, you automatically summon Bahamut, and then your GCDs turn into Bahamut GCDs. Do I think they should make it so that you have a single target and an AoE button for Bahamut that combo into each other, kind of like Phoenix does? Not necessarily, but it would be kind of cool if they had a single target version that you would use on a single target environment, and then a weaker AoE version that you would still want to use inside of a dungeon environment. I think that would totally work fine, and it would add a lot more consistency to the summoner job, and then it really feels like you're commanding Bahamut to do your attacks, because right now you're just spamming Ruin 3 and you're hoping that Bahamut can keep up with his auto attacks. There's some clunkiness there again as well that you need to do with finishing the Bahamut window with 2 instant cast GCDs, or he doesn't do enough worm waves, so again pet AI things over there. But yeah, there's basically a couple of cool things that they could change with Summoner. Improve the pet AI, get rid of energy drain, give them a new summon or something like that instead of energy drain. Could make things a little bit more spicy, and then the demi summons make them kind of more similar like the Firebird Trance, because Firebird Trance is really cool, and the way the Dreadworm Trance works right now is just kind of boring, because you only press Dreadworm Trance to reset Tri-Disaster, and then you're going outside of Dreadworm Trance pretty much immediately because you want to get that Bahamut summon out. So that is something that I would like to see changed. And those are all the things that I pretty much could think about at this moment. Let me know in the comments down below what you think about some of the changes. What would you personally like to see changed as well? Because of course, these are all my opinion from my experience playing these jobs. I don't play all of these jobs as much as the other as well. So there are definitely some jobs out there that I barely get to play at all at the moment. And of course, my opinions might be very different from the ones that you have. So I'm very curious to see what you guys have to say in the comments down below. Anyways, on that note, I want to thank you for watching, I want to thank my Patreons for their support, and I'll see you in the next one.